I'm Aldo. Welcome to Play is the Thing, the channel where I share my experiences prepping and playing tabletop role-playing games. This is the fifth play report in the ShadowDark game that I am running for my regular gaming crew. And as you probably know, ShadowDark is the dark fantasy role-playing game written by Kelsey Dion and published through her company, the Arcane Library. Before I jump into what happened in this session, let me give a little bit of an update as to what is coming up in Plays the Thing. First, I'm very happy to say that Champions Now, which is the game that I used to kick off this campaign, is coming back to the channel. We had to take a little bit of a hiatus because we couldn't get the band back together, but the Sentinels of Justice game will resume this Sunday. So that would be 2 days from now, and I will post a play report as soon as I have that ready. So that'll be very soon. I'm excited for that. Also, it looks like ShadowDark is going to stay on the radar for now because it's shaping up. The campaign is shaping up, and it's got some legs yet in it. So there'll be more ShadowDark coming up soon. All right, so with that, let's dive back into the ShadowDark game. And in order to do that, let me jump to hang on a second, let me jump to the virtual tabletop that we use, which is Foundry, right? It's become my virtual tabletop of choice. It was the last one that I invested in, but it's the one that I've gotten the most use out of. For various reasons. So anyway, here we have all the character tokens, as you'll be accustomed to if you've been watching this series. And we have a new player this time. And I will introduce her right now. Her name is Ishza. She is a a goblin thief, played by my friend Alex. And he'd made her for a one-shot that I'd run a little while ago. But I said it'd be fine if he brought her into the game. And the background that we gave her is that Ishza had fled trouble that she'd gotten into up in the Northern Lands, didn't really realize the area that she was entering into, the region of the Gloaming, and got attacked by some demonic force of sorts, and probably tumbled down a ravine or whatever, and ended up kind of being knocked unconscious, and for whatever reason, the demon that attacked her left her for dead and moved on to do whatever other chaotic thing it was going to do. And when she came to, she saw a trapper, an older man, middle-aged to older, who was in trouble fighting off stingbats or something like that. And she helped him out, threw a dagger or shot an arrow and killed the stingbat that would have killed him. And he then took her into Wardenwood. He was a trapper from Wardenwood, and he took her in. And we haven't fleshed him out very much. We know he is John the Trapper, because for some reason it popped into my mind that he would be played by Pernell Roberts, who played Trapper John MD in the Trapper John in the series Trapper John MD back in the 80s. And so we named him John the Trapper, and we're thinking that maybe he'd lost his family at some point, and has some need to connect to others or some sympathy for somebody in need. And so he took Ishza in, and she's only very recently arrived in Wardenwood. In fact, she's probably arrived in the couple of weeks since Drusilla's poisoning of the town, of the village, and the player characters kind of dealing with that situation and then dealing with the bandits and all of that. So she's a brand new character. And other than her, we have almost a full house. You'll see, I always put the tokens for the characters that actually participated in the session here, and you'll see that it's a full house. Of course, we have Nixie, the elven ranger, replacing Sir Bernard. Nixie is a character played a first level character, all right, ranger, played by my friend Dan, who lost Sir Bernard in the last session, sadly. So that's the character that he made to replace him. And we basically said that she had also recently arrived in Wardenwood because the demonic forces that have been sort of festering down here in the region that we're calling the Gloaming, have started to creep into her secret, her people's secret kingdom, hidden kingdom. We've decided that elves are extremely rare, almost mythological in our particular setting. And so she has ventured out to see what is going on, right? And so there she is in Wardenwood. Both Ishza and she are in Wardenwood when the rest of the party returns from their errand to track down the bandits. And if you recall from last session, they found out that the bandits were being led by Greaves Redthorn, who turned out to be a turncoat knight of St. Idris. He almost killed the whole party, but only Sir Brendan actually didn't make the death saves and all that, so he was killed. And the rest of the group managed to escape through some trickery on the part of Rowena, casting an illusory spell. And Ursula, who had been separated from the group, actually saw Greaves Redthorn, sort of, welcome the marrow fiend that popped out of the marrow tree that was in the center of the bandit camp. And she had managed to sort of break her bonds and hide. So she saw when Greaves Redthorn basically welcomed the marrow fiend and bid it to attack and eat all of his men, right? And she escaped and reunited with the party, and that was in that condition that they came limping back to Wardenwood. So I picked up there, I rolled initiative and went through the initiative order, basically saying, look, we're going to pick up about a week after the events of the last session. And what I want you to tell me is, in initiative order, what are the things that you're doing with that week, right? What are you trying to accomplish? What are you doing? And the person who won initiative actually was our friend Asher, the Warlock. And Asher is, has his patron is Shun the Vile, right? Who speaks through flame and is sort of a patron of a lot of witches and folks like that. So, and I very intentionally decided, since this campaign has legs, I wanted to turn to my warlock characters and start to do something with the patrons at this point, right? Because so far we haven't really dealt with that too much. There's been a little bit of suggestion here or there from the players as to what the nature of their connection to their patron is. Little hints, but I wanted to flesh that out more, and I found kind of an in-story way of doing that. So Mario told me when I asked him what Asher was doing that Asher was going to be spending most of his time in contemplation of the flames in his little shed in Wardenwood, and really just meditating. And so I told him that in that time, in that week, he'd been growing closer and closer. He'd been feeling the presence of his patron closer and closer. He had, of course, a strong connection when they first made the pact. But I decided, in recent weeks, that has been muted. But now it's coming back. And I told him that Shun the Vile revealed through the flames that Sir Bernard, his traveling companion, posed a threat to the likes of him and them, right? That Sir Bernard it was revealed in the flames, was the member of a secret order that should be stopped in some way. And Shun bid Asher do that, right? And Mario described how Asher then kind of went into convulsions and put out the fire and kind of vomited, and it was kind of a funny sort of response to it, but also kind of like a shocking response to it. And I don't know what Asher's going to do with that information, but the intimation was that actually that Shun had kind of retreated a little bit for fear of revealing the fact that Asher was connected to Shun because Sir Bernard pose that kind of threat. Similarly, when we turn to our other warlock, who is Kraith, right? When I asked my friend Andrew what Kraith was doing, he said that Kraith was going. He's sort of he's a warrior, but he's also spends a lot of time outside of Wardenwood, and he's always thinking about defenses and fortifications, that sort of thing. So he said that he was going to step out of the palisade and spend a lot of time kind of walking around Wardenwood and assessing how strong his fortifications are. Right? And hold on, I am forgetting the name of his patron, but I decided to have him get insights, because what he told me is that he wanted to see if he could think like a demon, to see, how a demon might approach the town. And I think the idea there was to sort of, get a sense of its weaknesses, of the town's weaknesses, so that he might try to fortify them. But his patron is the Willow Man, who of course is associated with nightmares and seeks fear. So I told him that as he was, and I had to make a roll, which he failed. So I told him that as he was kind of playing that mind game of trying to put himself in the shoes of a demon, and or in the wings, or in the whatever, the body of a demon, the mindset of a demon, and sort of look at Wardenwood, that he was getting some obvious things, kind of like, well, obviously if the demon has wings, he can fly over the palisade, and it's kind of like a burrowing demon, it can kind of go under, and he was having a hard time thinking of like anything beyond something so obvious. But as he kept trying to connect to that, I said, your perception starts to warp, and you start to get a sense of how much danger Wardenwood is in. It seems to you that the fortifications are not that strong, and that Wardenwood really is on a knife's edge in terms of its defenses being penetrated, and more so that he felt the compulsion to go and spread such fears to the people of Wardenwood. Basically, to tell the truth, but in telling the truth, of course, he'd be spreading uncertainty and fear. And I said, now it's a compulsion, but it's not mind control. Like I said, it's up to you what you do with that. And then we ended his turn order. I'm not going to go through all of the others, because most of the others were, Ursula said she was spending her time trying to do some extra labor to earn a little bit more coins so that she can repay back Renwick, who had purchased some equipment after she lost everything when she was captured. Gendry, who had lost his ability to cast cure light wounds in a couple of sessions prior, was trying to appeal to Madeira, is it the goddess of law, trying to see if there was anything that he could do. And Madeira's like, no, you need to strike a blow against the fiend that you left out in the wood. Remember, we decided that Madeira had pulled revoked the ability to cast a spell because he had tried to heal a knight of St. Idris who channels, infernal power, and that in order to atone for that, he had to strike a blow against a fiend or a fiend's agents, right? So he was just trying to deal with that. And most of the other characters just revealed some kind of general character stuff, just, nothing, no specific actions, except for two more. One is Rowena, our witch, who it occurred to her when they returned that her friend Sir Bernard's body was still lying out there, that they never brought it back to Wardenwood. And she's like, we have to go out and retrieve it. We need to give him a proper burial. And I also, before going into the round order, I described, like, people are very sad and distraught by the passing of Sir Bernard. He represented hope, but he was also a member of the community, and that they were grieving, and that they were talking about some sort of token, some sort of memorial, something to keep him in their thoughts, and that's when Rowena was like, oh my god, we never recovered his body, what are we going to do? So that was, she was like, we need to go out there, right? So Gendry didn't vocalize it, but he had a reason for going back out, which is to regain, connection to his deity. Rowena wanted to go out for connection, her connection to Sir Bernard and the retrieval of the body. And then Renwick, when I asked Jason what Renwick was going to be doing for the week, he said he was going to study his books, sort of do research and experimentation and contemplation and all of that, trying to figure out something more about this demon that was summoned in the wood. And he had asked that at the end of the previous session, and I had to make a roll, and he failed, and so I didn't reveal anything. But then when he asked me this time, I said, look, that's because you were trying to get something right away, but with time, because he's a specialist in learning about infernal beings so that he can fight them, so he can challenge them. So I said, with the week, you don't have to roll. And I gave him a little bit of lore. I said, Unduluk is a fiend, is a demon that is associated with the quote-unquote underworld. And at first you took that to be just a general reference to, like, infernal planes and stuff like that, kind of like a metaphorical reference. So I said, it's more than that, actually. You're able to piece together that Unduluk is a demon that rises from the actual, earth through vegetation and is sort of seeded and grown right into places where the wall between the barriers between dimensions is weak enough, and it manifests in that way. And I also said that Unduluk is legion, right? That the marrow fiend that was summoned was a piece of him, but that every marrow fiend that is summoned is Unduluk in aggregate, right? So that Unduluk is all of the marrow trees, which kind of die after they give birth to the marrow fiends, but that the marrow fiends, as many as they are, all represent the same entity. I also told him that he had been able to determine that those, for whatever reason, we don't know why yet, although I'm starting to generate a reason in the back of my mind. I think I know what's going on here and what happened, but I'm still kind of working it out. As game master, I'm like, something's piecing together for me that makes sense, right? But that Renwick was able to determine that for whatever reason, something has thinned the barriers between this region and the infernal planes, and that it's not just Unduluk that is rising here, that there are competing infernal entities and infernal planes that are overlapping. So he's been able to kind of develop a little bit of a limited taxonomy of like, okay, these are the Unduluk related phenomena, but there are others as well. And I said, you don't know, of course, the planar politics of what's going on, but that's your going theory. I said, that's what you've been able to put together as a theory. So Renwick was like, I said, after we went through the whole turn order, I said, okay, let's pick up with you guys then one night, a week later, sitting in the tavern. What's going on? And Jason's like, Renwick is explaining this theory to everybody assembled. And there was a great little role-playing moment where he starts doing that, and some of the other characters were like, could you please put it, in plain language? And he did. And then Rowena chimed in with like, well, we need to go out there to get, Bernard's body, and it's so sad. He was our hero. And this was great because Renwick was like, I'm not so sure that he was. And they're like, what the hell do you mean? And he's like, well, he was channeling infernal energy, and that's inherently corrupting. He's like, so I don't doubt that he was a friend, and I don't doubt that he was doing his best in the moment, but it is likely that in the long run, he would not have been Wardenwood's hero because it would have been corrupted. Look at the guy who killed him, right? And then Rowena, my wife Lauren, and Jason really play off really well off against each other. It's like, how could you be so insensitive? And she's weeping and stuff. She gets up and runs off, And he's like, I'm not trying to be insensitive. I'm just being factual, blah blah blah. So, all of that was going on, but they all agreed. Look, because Renwick said, look, I need to gather more information. We need to go back to the bandit camp and figure out if there's anything there, anything more for us to glean there. And he's like, let's go now. It turned out to be actually like a breakfast meeting, not a dinner evening. They were talking over breakfast. And he's like, let's go now. Gather your things. I'm going out there. And so they did. They all gathered and they all went out. Ishiza agreed to go because she's like, I'm tired of being in Wardenwood. Sounds like this is an opportunity to get some loot. She said her goodbyes to John the Trapper. John the Trapper was like, I understand, be careful, come back in one piece, all of that. But they all kind of banded together and went back out. Now, let me pause here as Game Master because I approached the session. My prep for the session was to reread the hex key for the setting. That was my preparation. I had no idea what they were going to do. In fact, when I said, what are you guys trying to accomplish over the course of that week, I was prepared for them to tell me that they're traveling or that they're, I don't know. I wasn't sure, but I was ready to use the table of rumors to generate some random seeds, right, for them to pursue. I just wasn't sure what they were going to do. But they gave me a direction, right? So that's great. So then procedurally, we started to play. After those interactions, we started to play, and we had them retrace. They've taken this journey once before, so they started to go. Let me see if I can ping on the map here. So they're in Wardenwood, which is here. They started to travel down this road. The idea was to travel for 2 days to this site here, which is where they had their camp previously. And I thought it was really cool because, in the first time they went out here, which was like, I think, 2 sessions ago, Ursula had found a really nice spot for a camp and they had kind of set it up. And Renwick, Jason was like, Renwick is going to improve it every time we come through here because this has become kind of like our rest stop. It's now a place that we frequented multiple times. It's like every time we come out here, he's bringing something with him, like a tin cup to hang on a tree or some improvement to the camp, to the way stop, right? Which I thought was really cool. It's a way of like calling out. It's reincorporation, right? It's calling back to something that a player had introduced at one point. And now he's doing something with it. So they did that, and they spent the night here. Then the plan was to push into, let me see, 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, they were going to go into the wood because I think the bandit camp is like here or what have you. Yeah, so they went. I need the players, the game master's map to know precisely, but they then spent a night, one more night in the wood. Oh no, I'm sorry. That's it. I'm messing something up. They can travel 2 of these per day. So night number 1, this is where the camp is, where I'm pinging now. That's where the camp is. And then that's what it was. They went second day. They traveled to this hex and then into this hex. And in this hex, they started to move into lands that were not evergreen forest, right? It was kind of like evergreen wetlands, right? And I was rolling for random encounters all throughout. They got very lucky. They didn't encounter anything on the first day, anything on the first night, anything on the second day, and then on the second night I rolled a random encounter. Before I rolled a random encounter, I don't remember. I think I may have rolled the random encounter first, because that started to give me a sense of the setting that they bed down for the night. So I rolled a random encounter and I rolled a unicorn. I was like, holy shit, a unicorn. That's kind of cool. And so Nixie, who's an elven ranger, was told me I'm looking for like a perfectly defendable spot. And she rolled, and I said, "You don't find." She failed. I said, "You don't find a perfectly defensible spot, but you do find like a slab of like polished white marble that is like jutting out of this kind of wet patch, and it's kind of gleaming in the moonlight, and you instantly know that it's fey touched. And at the same time that it might strike kind of like a nostalgic sense in you, it also brings you some measure of possibly, I don't want to dictate what she's thinking, but there's at least the chance that it brings some measure of sorrow, because you can tell that it's the foundation to a one-time great structure, but now it's only a foundation, and it is lopsided and sinking into this forest. And you see these trees that are kind of like gnarled and dead around it, and they seem to almost be like wrapping themselves, curling itself around this thing. And I think I actually described that first, and then I rolled a random encounter, and it turned out to be the unicorn. So as the rest of the party was describing how they were looking for mushrooms or setting up camp or starting a fire or doing all these things, I was like, once I rolled the random encounter, I was like, Nixie, you and Rowena, who had followed Nixie to the standing stone, to the foundation, right? Nixie went over and touched it. And she said, I told her it feels warm. And then suddenly you just know to turn and look to your right. And when you look to your right, you see your friends making camp. And beyond that, there's some elevated ground, and standing at that elevated ground, you see this regal unicorn standing there looking at you. And Nixie's like, let me go for, I'm going to go forward. I'm going to start heading over and say, stay back to Rowena. And she was going to go and talk to the unicorn or interact with the unicorn. And, but Lauren said, no, Rowena's going to follow a half step behind, because there's no way she's not going to go to a unicorn. So the two of them were heading in that direction. Now, I'm going to roll reaction for this unicorn, right? Like I am not going to, I just because Nixie's an elf doesn't mean that she gets automatic connection with unicorns necessarily, right? And this is a unicorn that is not in an ideal setting. It's a unicorn that is in an infernal forest situation. Who knows whether this unicorn has been tainted in some way? Who knows if this unicorn is suspicious? Remember, when they met fairies in the wood before, the fairies were suspicious, and they actually ended up being hostile. So who knows? So I rolled a reaction check as Nixie was going up to the unicorn, and I rolled hostile. Oh crap! But then I remembered that that Rowena also was approaching. And Rowena has a really high charisma. Nixie's charisma modifier is zilch, right? She's an elf. She has a kind of musical voice, and there's something that's surreal about her and all of that. But just in terms of the stats on the character sheet, she doesn't have a high charisma. Rowena does. And so I'm like, okay, since they're both approaching together, I will add Rowena's, charisma modifier to the roll. And that was enough to push it away from hostile and to suspicious, right? So I just said, as you approach, the unicorn like bounds away, right? And then there was and Dan has no way of knowing. Nobody has any way of knowing, right? But there was a way, and this is fine. It makes sense. But Nixie was like, maybe if I would have been able to approach alone, right? We could have gotten something from the unicorn and stuff. So blaming the non-elf for what happened, when in reality, if you look at what happened with the die rolls, Rowena's charisma saved that. That would have been a nasty encounter if that unicorn had actually ended up attacking the party. Right? So anyway, I quite enjoyed that encounter. It was a non-combat encounter, as it turned out, and all of that. But it was cool to me. The next day, they pushed into the wood, and they slept in the wood again. And this time, I rolled another random encounter, and this time it was a giant spider. Right. So when we determined watches, and Gendry and Kraith were on watch. And Kraith is the one who noticed the spider legs like coming out of the darkness behind Gendry, like, very, very quiet, but this huge, gigantic spider. And he saw the gleaming 8 eyes of the spider in the firelight of their campfire. Before it moved in and tried to grab Gendry, it hit Gendry. Actually, no, it didn't. It missed Gendry. So we said that it actually grabbed him, but the armor protected, and then Gendry slunk out. And then the spider was in the midst of the party, and it was a pretty quick fight from there. Nobody got bit, nobody got poisoned, but there was some pretty dramatic flourishes that happened as they were fighting this giant spider. And then we go up to the next day, where they were at this point just a hop, skip, and a jump away from the site where Sir Bernard had fallen. And I described how they find his body. It's been kind of ravaged by animals. They also, so they can't pick up any, because, it was interesting. Renwick went over and started examining him, looking for signs of who he was. Because remember, Renwick had always been suspicious of Sir Bernard. But Dan explained there's nothing that's advertising that he's a member of the Knights of St. Idris. Nothing like that. And if there had been, it had been kind of eaten away as the animals had torn at his flesh and stuff like that. So they wrapped his body in a cloak, and tied it up and prepared to carry it. But they for now, they just kind of left it in a secure spot as they proceeded to go to the bandit camp, right, which is this map here. And again, we went kind of initiative order. I told them, you see the place is littered with body parts, right? The Marrow Fiend went to town on the bandits, and there's just body parts of bandits all over the place, but you don't see anything else. Now, let me tell you this. Well, I'll tell you in a moment. Ursula, who's the only one who had seen this spot, then said, the big house, the one that I'm going to ping on right now, the one to the right where all the tokens are. She's like, that was where Greaves seemed to be headquartered, right? So they all kind of made their way over there, kind of commando style, and it was interesting because, man, Renwick, who is the wizard who has, he cast mage armor, so he didn't have a super low armor class, but he's definitely very low hit point, not a great combatant, but very brave. Just walks up to the house, casts a light spell, opens the door, and immediately starts moving to the back of the house, because his thinking is, I know this thing comes up from the ground, so I'm going to be looking for a trap door, a root cellar, something like that. And Rowena is right after her. The other warriors are coming in too, but they're being a little bit more cautious, right? There was something very like Doctor from Doctor Who about the way that Renwick just kind of like fearlessly walked into the situation and started moving forward, right? Nixie was covering them with her bow and arrow, and Kraith and Ursula were kind of coming in from a side door over here to where I'm pinging right now. And Nick and Ishza went to the other side of the house, and she was actually just kind of pilfering the place, like going in through windows and trying to see if she can find any treasure or stuff like that. But bottom line is that they got into the kitchen where Renwick did find a root cellar, opened it up, went down with Rowena, and when they got down there, they noticed a root cellar, but then there was this spot in the root cellar where roots, these marrow tree roots had kind of like busted through the wall and then kind of opened up this crevice, right? And it was like they smelled like, kind of rotting flesh down there and this kind of acidic kind of smell. And Renwick went there and he like shone his light into that crevice. And then I said that you can see that there's this narrow tunnel that you'd have to crawl through. And as you're looking at the very edge of your light, you see that it opens up into a bigger chamber. And then I said, you're looking at that chamber, trying to determine what's there, and suddenly you see like the head of Greaves like drop into view. Not that it fell off his body, but he just kind of, it's like Greaves dropped to the ground and looked to see who was coming. The light was coming, and then he smiled with like he looks maddened, right? He's like he's lost his mind, and he gets this malicious smile, and he starts crawling in your direction, right? And so at that point, Renwick was like, oh, insane night, and threw a magic missile and got the heck out of there. Hey, buddy, I'm recording. Can you? Thank you. I'll be down in a second. Daddy. Yep. Okay, that was my son getting me for dinner, but I'm going to finish the story before I go down to dinner. All right, so then Rowena like took a peek and saw, Red Thorn like crawling towards her and cast Eye Bite and then backed away. And then at that point, it was, who was it that jumped in? Oh, and then Gendry was with them, right? Gendry had gone in right after them as well. And so Gendry kind of dropped down to one knee and he took a shot at Greaves with his crossbow. Now he rolled a 1 to hit Greaves. And it's like, oh no, nothing goes right to Gendry. Every time Gendry has done something in this game, something has screwed him over. And he was like, you know what? I'm using my luck token. He had a luck token, so he used it and he re-rolled and he rolled a 19. Now, I have gotten to the point where I don't like hero dice or hero point or luck mechanics all that much. I don't like them actually almost at all now because I'm really leaning into the idea that the rolls should matter. That what you roll should stick. I didn't mind this one. I think Adolfo, who's Gendry's player, needed this. And Gendry needed this. So he rolled again. He got a 19. And, given the sort of the fictional positioning of what was going on, and the fact that there was not much wiggle room for Greaves, I ruled that it got him deep in the shoulder because he rolled maximum damage, like 6 points of damage, got him deep in the shoulder, which wasn't enough. Greaves has a good number of hit points. It wasn't enough to just take him out. But I said, you know what? And it wasn't the reason I made this call was really just because of the fictional positioning. I wasn't trying to nerf anything. It just, given the circumstances, it just made sense. I said Greaves loses use of that arm. And then as Greaves was coming out of the hole, when he finally got there, he's coming out of his hole, he comes dragging his two-handed sword, and I'm like, his great sword, and I'm like, oh, he doesn't have use of the arm. And I initially I was like, oh, that's he can use it one-handed, but like, no, actually that's a bastard sword that you can use one-handed. This is not a versatile weapon. So I'm like, okay, well, and Jason suggested it, and I was already thinking about it too. He's gonna have to be attacking with disadvantage. And at that point, Craith jumped into the fray, right? Because he'd heard the commotion, and he had a held action, so he ran down the hallway where he had seen the other characters pass him by. He was kind of waiting or hanging out in the dining room area. But when he heard that commotion, he came running down, jumped down the stairs of the root cellar, and attacked Greaves. And they started duking it out. They started fighting. Now, it was a small root cellar, so there was no room for everybody to get in there. So it was really just those 4 combatants. And Ursula came in trying to reach with a spear but couldn't and stuff. So that's the way it went. Long story short, at this point, the first time they fought Greaves, he was overwhelming. This time, some folks had gained some levels. I had made that ruling, so he was fighting at disadvantage. The situation was just different, and Greaves fell in combat, died, killed by Gendry, if I'm not mistaken. No, I actually don't remember who struck the killing blow at this point. I don't remember if it was Greaves or Craith. It was one of the two. And as he fell before them, I told them that they heard this kind of like sick slurping sound, and a root that kind of, a tongue-light root came out of the crevice and dragged his body back into the hole. And that's where we ended the session, right? So there we go. I feel like a lot happened. They got, revenge, or they avenged, Sir Bernard. And here they are. Now, let me say one last thing about what they encountered here. I decided before they arrived that there would be a kind of a random encounter chance for Greaves to be here, and a separate random encounter chance for the Marrow Fiend to be here as well. If the Marrow Fiend had been here, that would have been really bad. Really, really, really bad. I rolled a d8 and it rolled a 1. So that meant Greaves was here. And then I rolled another d8 and I rolled a 4. It meant the Marrow Fiend was not there. So I guess the party got lucky twice. They got lucky that there was anybody there at all, right? And they got lucky that the one that was there was Greaves and not the Marrow Fiend, right? So lucky twice in that case. But it was a totally a random roll. I didn't write it that way. It just turned out that way. So that's it. That's where we are now. We were going to play the 6th session this week, but Jason couldn't make it. And because Renwick this is kind of Renwick's expedition in a lot of ways. I didn't want to play without Renwick. So we're not running it this week. Instead, we're going to run a one-shot in something. I might run a one-shot in a different ShadowDark setting, or I might run a one-shot in another game entirely. I'm not sure yet. But like I said at the top, Champions Now is something that we're running on Sunday. So that means that maybe I'll have 2 videos for next week. We'll see. Okay. So that's it for this video. Thank you so much for sticking around till the end. As usual, I wish you good health. I wish you good cheer. And I wish you good gaming. Goodbye.